jump into this preview of the Nikon D750. If you haven't signed up for the Froknows Photo email list, go ahead, click in this orange box up on the screen. It's going to take you over to the site. Put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I will send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations. Jared Polin, FroknowsPhoto.com, and this is a preview of the Nikon D750. So before we get into the video specs, let's jump right into the photo specs. What do we have? We have a 24.3 megapixel CMOS FX sensor. They say that it's newly designed. Whatever that means, it may mean that it could be the same sensor as the D610 with some tweaks to it. So we'll see what that really does mean when it fully comes out. It has an Expeed 4 processor that helps with processing the RAW files, processing the JPEGs, and processing the video. The ISO range is 100 to 12,800, and it's expandable in the H2 mode up to 51,200. So 100 to 12,800 is a huge range, whether you're shooting in a studio situation or shooting in low light situations. Now, it does 6.5 frames a second. That is a lot of frames a second, considering that my D2H back in the day did 8 frames a second in a pro body. This is a nice frame rate. 6.5 frames is nice. Now, you can shoot in FX mode, DX crop mode, which is 1.5 times, and then there's another mode, which is the 1.2 crop mode. Now, if you add a vertical grip to this, it doesn't speed up the frames per second like it has done in some of the past cameras. So in any of those crop modes, you're still only going to get 6.5 frames a second, which isn't bad at all. We have a 51-point AF system with 15 of those being cross-type. Now, this is pretty much a pro AF system. Remember in the D610 how it only had those 39 and they're crunched up in the middle? Well, in this time, they're further out. It's very similar to what you would see in your D810. So that is good to have this better AF system in here. Wider than D610 is what I just said. So we have group area AF. The D810 has that, and so does my D4S. So that is great to have. Next generation AF detection to -3 EV. So that means that you can focus better in low light situations. What is the D810? -2. What is the D4S? -2 also. So this is getting better low light detection than the more expensive cameras that I kind of own. New picture controls. One of them allows you to do flat picture control. That helps for when you're doing video. It doesn't matter when you're shooting RAW for photos, because we know that when you shoot RAW, you can tweak everything later. 2 SD card slots, so no CF, just 2 SD like the D7100 and like the D600 and D610. That's not a problem. The SD cards are not too expensive these days, and they're much bigger capacity, and they're pretty darn quick. Tops out at 1/4000th of a second, whereas the pro bodies tend to do 1/8000th of a second for shooting in bright-ass daylight. That's where a circular polarizer or neutral density filter is going to come in handy to cut back on some of that light. And the cycles for the shutter are rated to 150,000 cycles. You're really never going to run out of cycles for shooting this camera, so that's not something I really worry about too much. It uses the ENEL15 battery, which is the same as the D810, the D800, the D610, the D600, the D7100, the D7000, and all of those uses the same battery. That is a good thing. Oh, and it adds something new to Nikon cameras. It has a 3-axis tilting 3.2-inch LCD screen. They're saying it's metal. It does not rotate, but it means it comes out of the back of the camera. You can then, I don't know if it does 90 degrees exactly. They didn't have those exact specs, but that means that you could hold it down and tilt it up. That means that you could hold it above your head and tilt it down. So you have a movable screen. You just can't rotate it, but that is a new step forward. That is a good thing. It has Wi-Fi built in. Wi-Fi's built in this time, and it still has a pop-up flash, whereas on the Canon, that 6D just had Wi-Fi built in without a pop-up flash. And the pop-up flash in this does a commander mode. It also commands 14-bit RAW, so you can do that in the uncompressed, but it does not give you an option for RAW small like the D810 gave you. I would have liked to have seen that option added to this camera. They just didn't do it. Now, one of the things that Nikon pushed to me on this was that it's crazy light. Don't quote me on that, but they said that it's very light. It comes in at 750 grams. I don't know if that's a lot in drug terms. It's probably a lot of grams, but it's extra light because I don't know what they took out of it, magnesium alloy, and it comes in at the thinnest point, 43.5 millimeters thin. That's very small on the millimeter scale. So what they did is they moved some of the motors inside the camera to different portions or different areas so that they could make it smaller. I haven't held on to one yet. We just talked on the phone, but that is one thing that they stressed, how light it is and how thin it is in certain portions. So that is a good thing if anybody is looking for a pro quality body that's a little lighter than some of the other bodies out there. Price tag, $2299.95. That is unbelievably affordable, especially at the time of this recording, that the D610 is just under $2,000. For under $300 more, you can have this camera with the better AF, but let's talk about the video first before we do the comparison. It's the same video as the D810. Now, of course, it's a different sensor than the D810, but what does this mean? It means it has power aperture, meaning you can change your aperture while video is recording. You couldn't do that with the D610 and below. This is something that comes in handy when you need to change your aperture. You have full manual control for doing video. That is extremely important. You have 1080 at 60 frames a second. All cameras are moving into that. You're going to start to see them get even faster than that. You're going to start seeing 720 at 120 frames a second, and then someday maybe we'll see 4K at 24 frames. It's not far off, but right now 1080 at 60 frames a second is great. It will record to an Atomos, an external device like an Atomos, as well as the SD card. So you can do external recording and to the card inside, so you have a double backup. That's something that I'm looking forward to have. That's a great option. And it offers you the auto ISO that the D810 and the D4S has. I've used this. I love the auto ISO when it comes to shooting video. For example, if you're shooting in a car garage and then the door is open and you walk out into the sun, it's going to gradually change the ISO, not in stutter steps, but in actual slide variants, just so that it's smooth. We'll call it smoothing ISO. So that is those are the main specs. This camera right here is poised to be one of the best cameras that Nikon has made. Of course, I haven't used it yet, but based on the specs, it's better than a D610. For a couple $100 more, it's a camera that I would recommend spending the money on, especially if you're somebody who's getting into video more. The specs for video are well worth it. The specs for photos are well worth it. This kind of puts the D610 in a place where I would say, don't buy it. Spend the extra money when you're jumping into this full frame. If it's $300 or less, I would spend the money and get this D750 over the D610. Still make sure that you put good glass onto this. And we're going to do a full comparison between the Nikon D610 and the D750 when I get them in my hand. So stay tuned for one of those in the future. But this camera, I am really liking it for $2299.95. Would I want this over a D810? I'm not really sure. They both have pretty darn good specs, but the specs that are in this camera, this is great for sports. This is great for portraits. This is great for shooting weddings. This kind of is like that the D700 that came out back in the day, but just updated. This is really a camera that is poised to be spectacular and fantastic, and it's crazy light, quote unquote. Don't quote me on that, and don't quote Nikon on that either. So that is it. That is all I have to say about it. Stay tuned for a full review in the future. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya. I hope you enjoyed that video. Now, if you haven't subscribed here on YouTube, go ahead, click that button over here so you can get the latest videos as they come out. But if you want to see some other videos, I call them quick tips. They're really quick, good videos that are going to give you some information to be better photographers. Go ahead, click up on this box up here somewhere, and you can get right to the quick tips. All right, go ahead. Click something.